Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Elise Bizzelli from the Connecticut Green Bank. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I know we've had a crazy couple of days with the storm coming through and outages, power outages, internet outages. So thank you all for taking the time to join. So this is the Energy Efficiency plus Solar PV SIR Calculator training. And so we'll first go through a quick welcome with some housekeeping, and then I'll talk through the agenda, and then we'll get going with the training. We could go to the next slide. Great. So we will be breaking throughout the presentation for questions. So please use the chat feature as questions come up. We'll be kind of managing those questions as they come through, and then when we get to the questions break, we'll consolidate the questions, read them aloud, and either myself or VJ will be able to answer those questions for you. So please send in any and all questions that you have. We want to make sure that you all are getting the most out of this training. So you'll be able to use this calculator as best you can to help you with projects that you're bidding on, or trying to incorporate CPACE financing into those projects. So certainly ask questions as we go. All right, and next slide, please. Great, so the agenda for today, we'll start with some introductions to the Green Bank as well as energy and resource solutions. We'll talk about the savings to investment ratio, just give you a quick debrief on that, reminder on how the savings to investment ratio works. Then we'll talk about how to download the workbooks, the SIR calculators. Then we'll give you a project example, an introduction to that project example, and then we'll use the project example to actually enter the data into the SIR calculator tool. Then we'll review those results, and then we'll end things out with some contact info for ERS, our partners at ERS. But again, feel free to ask questions as we go through that chat feature, and we'll be pausing to answer those as we go through. All right, next slide, please. Great. So this is just pretty much a review for most of you, I'm sure, but the Connecticut Green Bank, we're a quasi-state organization that was formed with the basic function of trying to deploy as much clean energy in the state of Connecticut as possible. So we administer different programs to help carry out that mission. And the idea is to utilize the public dollars that we get to attract private capital investors into Connecticut to actually finance these projects. And so as you're all aware, CPACE is the main financing tool that we have available to commercial properties in Connecticut. And the savings to investment ratio feature, the SIR, is a statutory requirement. And it can be a little bit challenging to understand how to calculate those savings that we're looking for. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So that's really what the whole idea behind these calculators is to give you an easy way to get to that savings to investment ratio and to see if a project will work from that standpoint. So again, the Connecticut Green Bank administers the CPACE program here in Connecticut, and ERS, Energy and Resource Solutions, they're the technical administrator for the CPACE program here in Connecticut. So they also do most of the review, actually all of the reviews for the Connecticut Green Bank financed projects, but they are the administrator of the program, and they worked really hard on getting these calculators ready for you all to use, and hopefully making them user-friendly and easy to follow. So again, we appreciate you guys joining today. And Satyan Moray and Vijay Gopalakrishnan, which I think I got right, are the two leads that you'll be working with mostly on CPACE projects here in Connecticut. So with that, I will turn it over to Vijay to talk about the SIR.
Thanks, Elise, and yeah, you got my name perfectly right, so awesome. So I'm going to start with a quick introduction to the savings to investment ratio. So the Connecticut CPACE program requires that projects achieve an SIR, or savings to investment ratio, of above 1. So what that essentially means is over the life of the project, the total cash inflow needs to exceed the total cash outflow. Now, the cash inflows can include the energy savings, maintenance savings, income tax credits, depreciation credits, recs, any real income can be calculated as part of the inflow. And then in terms of outflow, it's the project cost, the closing fees, the financing costs. They can all be rolled into the to the outflow. So as long as the total inflow is greater than the total outflow over the life of the project, the SIR would be above 1. So the Connecticut Green Bank has made 2 SIR calculators available for contractors to use. One is a solar PV calculator that we talked about on Tuesday, and the second is an energy efficiency plus solar PV SIR calculator that we'll be talking about today. So before we dive into project examples and data entry, we're going to kind of start by showing you how to download the SIR calculators. So first, you would go to cpace.com and click on the Contractor page on the home page, the Contractor link. Then you would click on Resource Center. That's at the top of the page. And from there, you will see 2 of the SIR calculators right here. So when you click on the calculators, they will begin downloading. I'm going to quickly, give you a live walkthrough of how to download it, just in case anyone runs into any snags. You can let us know, and we'll be happy to help you with that. So first, you click on Contractor on cpace.com, Contractor, and then you go to the Resource Center. And under the Resource Center, you'll see that there are 2 calculators right here. So if you click on that, it goes to download, and similarly for the other one. So today we'll be talking about the energy efficiency plus solar PV calculator. So before we continue, do we have any questions? All right. So I'm going to start by giving you a quick introduction to the project that we're going to be using as an example for data entry today. So we have a commercial facility with an annual electric energy use of 2 million kilowatt hours and a natural gas usage of about 10,000 therms per year. There are 3 energy efficiency measures that are being proposed. One is lighting and controls. The second is HVAC replacement. And the third is a BMS upgrade measure. So this facility has applied to and received a letter of agreement from the utility for incentives for the energy efficiency measures. So I'm going to give you a quick kind of rundown of each of the 3 measures, a quick summary of the measures, and then we'll dive into the actual calculator. So first, lighting and controls. We have the replacement of existing fluorescent and halogen lighting with LED fixtures. The proposed LED fixtures will have occupancy and daylighting controls built into them. So the lighting measure is expected to save about 120,000 kilowatt hours per year and 35 kW per month. The measure cost is about $140,000, and the utility incentive is about $90,000. So kind of a net cost of $50,000 and a 15-year measure life. Next, we have an HVAC replacement project. So this is the replacement of 6 existing 30-year-old rooftop units with new high-efficiency rooftop units. This measure is expected to save 38,000 kilowatt hours per year and 30 kW for each summer month. Now, the reason I specify summer month, I'll get deeper into that as we go through the spreadsheet. The measure cost is $176,000, and the utility incentive is $6,000 for a net cost of $170,000. And the measure has a 15-year life. The third measure is a BMS upgrades measure that includes DCV, dual enthalpy controls, and variable frequency drives on supply fans on the 6 new RTUs. So this measure is expected to save 57,000 kilowatt hours per year with 8 kW per summer month and 400 therms per year. The measure cost is $20,000, and the utility incentive is $5,000 for a net cost of $15,000, and you have a 15-year measure life for this measure. So before we dive into the spreadsheet, are there any questions about the summary of the measures that we just went over? All right. So now we dive into the spreadsheet. So I'm going to start with a quick walkthrough of each of the tabs that we have on the spreadsheet, and then move on to specific inputs and summary measures. So first, we have the README tab. So the purpose of this spreadsheet, as is detailed in the README tab, is to help property owners, project developers, and the Green Bank determine how much CPACE financing a project is eligible for to maintain to achieve a FAR greater than 1. So the primary instructions, I guess, with respect to this tool are always start with the Inputs tab and then move on to the Summary of Measures tab. If the Inputs tab is not fully populated, the Summary of Measures tab is going to have trouble. So always start with Inputs, enter 100% of the inputs, and then move on to the Summary of Measures tab. So the gray cells within the Inputs and Summary of Measures tabs are the calculated cells where you don't need to enter anything. And the cells that are currently in red are where you need to enter values. And once you enter something in the red cells, they'll turn yellow if the values are entered correctly. And if the values are out of bounds or are incorrect, they'll turn purple with a strike through. So the various tabs are the README tab, the Inputs tab, which is where a majority of the data entry is going to be, a Summary of Measures tab, which is where the measure-specific data is going to be entered. The CPACE FIR model tab is where the calculations take place, or the inflow and outflow calculations take place, to be precise. There's a cash flow chart that'll kind of populate, and you'll see it a little later, which you can use for marketing and other purposes. And these are the tabs that are in yellow, which means that there's some level of data entry that needs to occur within these cells. All the cells that are in red are cells that we use as references or as samples, but not necessarily where you need to populate or contractors need to populate any information. So in red, we have the measure life reference, which we can go through this, and for each measure, there's measure lives that are listed. This comes from the Connecticut Program Savings document. So if you're looking for measure life, and if the product warranty information or any of that information isn't quite clear or has a measure life that's not reflective of the true measure life of the measure, you can look here at the Connecticut Program Savings document, or at the ASHRAE measure life document, or any other good reference to figure out what the measure life is for any given measure. Next, we have a utility bill example. This shows how we would break down the calculations for the dollar per kilowatt hour and dollar per kW for avoided electric cost or savings through each of these measures. So I'm not going to walk through each of these hidden tabs, but I'm going to quickly give you a summary of them. The summary tables just summarize project specifics within tables. The closing fee calculator shows you what the financing closing fees are for the projects. The tax benefits detail, if there's a depreciation makers credits for solar PV projects or income tax credits, the tax benefits tab has that information and those calculations. The principal and interest tab is essentially the calculations that show, what the annual payments or semi-annual payments are. And finally, the interest rates tab show the default interest rates through the Connecticut Green Bank for each term that's selected. So between 5 and 25 years, there's, the corresponding interest rates are shown in those tabs. They're all in red because there's no data entry expected from the contractors in those cells. So with that, I'm going to dive into the inputs. So this is the inputs tab. This is where the majority of the data entry is going to be. So we can start with the date of the proposal. I'm going to say today is the date of the proposal. Site host name for now, I'm just going to X. Street address, whatever the address of the town is. The city, the state is default Connecticut. And for now, I'm just going to put a zip code of Rocky Hill. Now, site annual electric use. So as I provided to you in the summary of the project example, this facility uses 2 million kilowatt hours per year, and the natural gas usage is about 10,000 therms per year. And there's no other fuel use. I'm going to put 0 there. So these values come from an analysis of the utility bills. So ideally, you have at least previous 12 months worth of utility bills that you can use to determine what the total annual usage is. If those bills aren't available, you could also use the most recent bill, and the most recent Eversource and UI bills typically have the previous 12 months worth of usage listed. So you could use that information as well. What's important to note here, though, is that the usage that you enter here needs to be representative of typical operation and not operation that has, other impacts, including what we're dealing with right now, COVID impact. If the facility was significantly impacted by COVID, but the previous 12 months of the bills aren't representative of how you expect them to operate, you need to go back to a period where, let's say 6 months ago, use 12 months from 6 months ago in order to make sure that we're using representative bills. So for now, it's 2 million kilowatt hours at 10,000 terms per year. Next, we go to the energy and cost inputs, which is essentially the utility rate, tariffs, and avoided cost information. So before I start entering data here, I'm going to quickly take you to the electric utility bill example. So this is just an example bill of a UI bill. And so it's a UI is the utility, and the transmission and distribution rate is a general service bill. In yellow highlight are all the kilowatt hour based charges, and in green are all the kW based charges. And so how we break this down for avoided cost is we add up all the kWh components separately and all the kW components separately, and we come up with dollar per kilowatt hour, which in this case is 9.6 cents a kilowatt hour, and dollar per kW, which is 17.84. So the buildup of the 9.6 cents is 0.07, so 7.35 cents a kilowatt hour is the generation charge. There's no transmission charge in kilowatt hours. The distribution charge is about 1.36 cents a kilowatt hour. And the combined public benefits charge is about 0.9 cents a kilowatt hour. And the decoupling adjustment, which is a credit, is about 0.08 cents a kilowatt hour. So those are the components that feed into the avoided kilowatt hour base charges. And then for kW, you have $4.25 per kW for the transmission. You have $11.34 for the distribution per kW, and then a non-bypassable FMCC per kW, which is 2.25. So we add those up to come up with the avoided dollar per kilowatt. So that's on the electric side. So let's go back to the inputs and start by entering that. So the electric utility is UI. The tariff is general service. And then we go to the electric cost is 0.096. That's 9.6 cents a kilowatt hour. And the peak demand is $17.84 a kW. Next, we go to the natural gas utility. Now, for natural gas, we take the total natural gas cost and divide it by the usage. But what's important to remember is there's often a supply and a delivery that's separate. So I'll show you an example. So we have a supply bill for a facility that has about $0.58 per term. And then separately, we have a distribution bill for natural gas, a delivery bill for natural gas, that has an additional about, in this case, about 40 cents, $0.4 a term. So if you were to enter the natural gas utility, in this case, it's Eversource, that's the delivery utility, and the natural gas tariff as we can see right here is rate R30, that's the large general, so that's R30. And then the natural gas dollars per term in this case is 0.581, which is from the supply, plus about 0.4, which is the dollar per term based on the delivery bill. So it's about $0.98 per term is what we come up with. So it's important to include supply and delivery. This is an error that we've seen fairly frequently where just the delivery is included and no supply. So we have to make sure that all the costs are included. In this case, there are no other fuels, so that would just be 0. I will note here at this point, it's important that if something is 0, you still enter 0 and not leave it blank, because we need every cell that's in red populated to make sure that there's no errors and things like that. So with that, we have the financing inputs. I will come back to the CPACE term financing shortly. And the reason is that we need to first calculate the effective useful life for these measures before we can come back to the financing term, because the finance term is capped at the effective or expected useful life of each of these projects. So let's say the term can be anywhere between 5 and 25 years, but if the EUL is 15 years, you can't have a term that's 20 years or 25 years. It has to be capped at 15 years. So we'll start with calculating the EUL and then come back to entering the term. In this case, we're not including any solar and we're not including any depreciation credits and things like that for these projects. So there's no ITC, no makers depreciation, and the default property marginal tax rate, property owner's marginal tax rate is 21%. That's what we'll enter for now, but because there's no make depreciation, it's really quite not relevant, but 21% is the default. There are no solar PV, there's no solar PV measure here, so we're going to just essentially enter zeros across this entire section. Now we go to the energy efficiency measure inputs. So for this section, we actually move on to the summary of measures tab. So the summary of measures tab is where all the energy efficiency measure specific details are entered. So let's start right here. The energy conservation measure, the first is lighting and controls. And as we saw previously in the example, we have about 120,000 kilowatt hours of savings from this measure, 35 kW per month, no natural gas savings, no other fuel savings. The cost before incentives is $140,000. And the utility incentives were $90,000 for this measure. And the degradation for this measure we entered is 0.5%, and the EUL is 15 years. Now, the degradation is going to be measure specific, and really even within different measures, there could be different degradations based on the details of the measure. For example, there is, let's say, a degradation of lumen degradation for lighting. However, if there's no control, let's say there's no high-end trim controls, and it's just simply a lighting replacement, even though there's lumen degradation, there may not be a degradation or increased energy usage due to the degradation. However, if you do have high-end trim and it's set at 70%, and a year from now or 2 years from now, due to degradation of the lumens, you need to increase that high-end trim, there could be an energy penalty which would be accounted for by this degradation. So really, it's measure specific, and it really, you need to, you can always reach out to us to ask us if you have questions about what degradation to use for different measures, but that's not really, we use 0.5 as a default, but it's not by any means accurate necessarily for every single measure. That's going to be specific to measure. So next we move on to HVAC replacement. So we have HVAC replacement, and the savings were about 38,000 kilowatt hours per year. Now, if you remember, we said this is 30 kW per summer month. So what that would mean is we need to calculate this as a function of 12 months and not just the 4 months that this particular measure is relevant for. So we would put the 30 multiplied by the 4 months divided by 12 months, because all the calculations occur in terms of annual demand savings. So the cost savings are in terms of 12 months. So you need to make sure you kind of scale this down to match the average over 12 months rather than just the peak of the 4 months where the savings are going to be realized. So it's 10 kW average over the 12 months, but it's actually 30 kW for 4 months. There are no natural gas savings for this measure and no other fuel savings. The cost before incentives was $176,000 with a $6,000 incentive. The degradation again for this measure was 0.5% with a 15-year EUL. The next measure that we have is BMS upgrades. So we have about 57,000 kilowatt hours of savings. This measure actually has a 8 kW reduction over the summer months, but this also includes shoulder months, because these include measures that don't just result in savings in the summer, but also some of the shoulder months. So this actually has 8 kW multiplied by 7 months divided by the 12, the annual. So that's the annual demand reduction average. This does have a 400 therm per year natural gas savings with no other fuel savings. The cost of this measure was $20,000 with a $5,000 utility incentive. We apply a 0.5% degradation factor to this as well with a 15-year EUL. So on the right, you have a lot of gray cells where the calculations occur. So the savings are capped at whatever the EUL you use. So let's say you have 17 years. As you saw, I changed the lighting EUL to 17 years, and this automatically increases the savings through year 17. So those you don't need to do anything with those cells. They're in gray, but I just wanted to point out that with changing the EUL, the numbers change accordingly. There is no solar PV for this project, but moving down here, we need to calculate the EUL. So how we calculate the EUL is twofold. In this project, they were all 15 years, but let's say we change this to 10 years. As you can see, the EUL weightage changes. But how this calculates it is in terms of cost savings and in terms of installed cost after incentives. So we take the higher of the two weighted averages. So as I changed earlier, let's say it's 10 years for the lighting, which results in 12 years by cost savings and 14 by installed cost. We would take 14 years as the EUL for this project. So now that we're done entering all the information into the summary of measures tab, I'm going to move back to the inputs, right? So going back up to the financing inputs, as we see, the effective useful life is 15 years for this measure. So we're capped at 15 years. So if you enter 15 years, which is the maximum term you can get, the financing rate auto-populates. But let's say you wanted a 20-year term and you only have a 15-year EUL. If you enter 20, it strikes through because it's greater than the 15 years. That's the maximum allowable. So that's where the purple cell comes into question. But if you do go with 10 years, that's allowable, and the interest rate changes accordingly. So for now, we're going to go with the 15-year term, which is the maximum allowable term, and move down to the project financed amount summary. So $235,000 is the total project cost after incentives. There is no grant available for this facility, so I'm going to zero that out. And the owner does not wish to put up any money up front, so I'm going to say $0 for that. So the finance amount before closing fees is $235,000. And the closing cost is $7,050. You can look at the details of those calculations in the closing fee calculator tab, but for now I'm not going to go into detail, but you can feel free to take a look at that. Let us know if you have any questions. And so the total financed amount is the sum of these two values, which is $242,000. With that, we move on to the simple CPACE FIR model tab, where really all the calculations have taken place. And we have the savings. So we have the annual electric usage, the energy savings in terms of kilowatt hours, the kW savings, natural gas savings, and there's no solar PV, there's no other fuel for this guy. And then the energy costs, electric energy costs, we escalate the energy costs at 2.99% every year. All the utilities are escalated at the same rate, so 2.99% across. And since there's no other fuel, it's just $0, and there's no relevant wholesale metric here. The wholesale electric rate really applies when the total generation from solar PV exceeds the annual electric usage, then the wholesale electric rate comes into play. But here, since there's no solar PV, we're going to move on from there. There's no solar PV energy cost savings. The energy cost savings in terms of energy efficiency measures is about $31,665 a year. So that gets calculated through year 15. There are no RECs, no makers, and no ITC for this project. So the total cash inflow is just essentially the energy cost savings for this project. The PACE payments are based on a 15-year term and auto-calculate and populate right here. If you enter 10 years, it changes the calculations accordingly. There's no inverter replacement cost to be entered for this project since there's no solar PV. So the total payments and the total cash inflow are here. You also have an annual net cash flow and the net cumulative cash flow available here, and that'll populate in the cash flow chart we'll see. So you have an annual SIR, but you also have the total project savings investment ratio, which is the relevant metric, needs to be above 1. So in this case, the total cash inflow is $566,000 and investment is $364,000 for a net savings investment ratio over the life of the project is 1.555, which is great. It's higher than 1, and it's exactly what we want to see. As I mentioned, the cash flow chart can be used for any marketing purposes or anything you need. You do need to make adjustments to this chart based on the actual project specifics. You can adjust the axes. You can adjust how many years you actually want reflected. So in this case, it was a 15-year project, 15-year term with 15-year EUL. So you would essentially get rid of anything that goes above that period. And then if you need to adjust the axes, you can, the primary and the secondary axes. So yeah, so that's the project specific, that's the SIR. Now, does anyone have any questions? Okay. So if you have any questions as to these calculators, or have any clarifying points you'd like to make, or any measures you'd like help with, feel free to contact us. This is the contact information for myself and Satyan. And we'll be sharing these slides with you, so you'll have this information. Anytime you have any questions, feel free to call us, and we'd be happy to help.
Great. Thank you, Vijay. That was excellent. So we'll give everybody a couple of more minutes here, or another minute or so, just to see if you have any questions that you want to enter into the chat box, and we can read those aloud and answer anything that you've got questions on. But in the meantime, I'll mention we did record this webinar, and we will be making it available to you all. We'll send that out next week, along with the recording for the solar PV SIR calculator that we did on Tuesday. So you'll get those links next week, and we'll also be making these webinars available on our website as well in the next couple of weeks. So you'll be able to access them there. If you have any questions, if you go back and you start to use the calculator and you realize you couldn't remember how to do a certain piece of it, you can always check back on the recorded webinar. Or if you have other team members that couldn't join today, you can certainly send them that link, and they can review that. But as Vijay said, always feel free to contact any of us at Vijay Arsadi at ERS, or myself, or anyone else on the CPACE team here at the Green Bank. We're always happy to help with any questions you have on these. So I'll just check to see if we have any questions that came in the meantime.
So we do have 2 questions that came through. So the first is there a calculator for storage?
So there haven't been any storage projects that have come through the CPACE program that we worked on so far, but we could use this calculator that we just went through in order to include storage. So for example, if there are additional value streams that need to be added in for the cash inflows, we can always make those adjustments and create a custom cash inflow and cash outflow calculation. Rows or tabs as necessary, but we don't have a separate storage calculator at this time.
Great, thanks, Vijay. And then the other question we've submitted here is, do both sheets have to be submitted if there are solar PV considerations? No. So if there's a solar PV measure in addition to energy efficiency measures, they can all be entered as part of this tool that we just showed. So there is a solar PV input section within this tool. So in this particular example, we didn't include solar PV, but if we were to include solar PV as part of a project, so let's go back really quick to the inputs. We would just go here, and let's say we want to include, I'm just making up numbers, so 100,000 watt DC system with 122,000 kilowatt hours of production, $50,000, $200,000 cost,
$100 per rec, 100 megawatt hours, 15-year rec term, 25 years. I'm just at this time. So now that we've entered some of the solar PV specifics for this project, if you go to the summary, the simple CPS-SIR calculator, we actually do have solar PV energy cost savings that have been incorporated. The recs have been populated, and if we were to go back and also change the fact that we do want to include tax credits for the solar PV, you can include the tax credits. So you go back to the simple CPS-SIR model, and the makers and the ITC have been incorporated. So the project now is a solar PV plus energy efficiency project right here. So you can include all solar PV plus energy efficiency measures within this tool. If you have just a solar PV project, then you could enter the other tool. It's a little more straightforward to use, but if you do have any energy efficiency measures, you can put it all right here.
It doesn't look like we have any more questions coming in right now.
Okay, great. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap up the webinar. So again, thank you all for joining, for taking the time to join. And if you have any additional questions afterwards, certainly, like I said, feel free to contact any of us. Happy to answer those. And again, look out for that, the recording to be sent out sometime next week, and also listed up on the website in the next couple of weeks. So thank you all, and hope you have a great day.